My name is Myra Driscoll, and I was 41 the day my mother-in-law decided my daughter wasn't real family. It happened at a June wedding, on a wooden dance floor, in front of 80 people who had spent all afternoon whispering that a colonel was coming. My 7-year-old Lila was dancing. She wasn't hurting anyone. She was just spinning in her new white shoes while the second song played. Then a hand closed around her wrist and pulled. What that hand did on the dance floor was only the first thing that broke that day. The second was a hospital door at 7 that evening. The third was a name nobody at that wedding ever expected to belong to me. My husband's family had built a whole story about who I was, and who my child was, and where we both ranked at their table. They were about to learn how wrong every line of it was. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, the channel where the quiet ones in the family finally get the last calm word, and where dignity does the talking instead of volume. If you have ever been underestimated by the people who should have known you best, stay with me tonight. Drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. I had flown back from a posting 2 days before the wedding, which in my husband's family translated to a single sentence. Myra is off doing her government thing again. That was Coral, my mother-in-law, and she said it the way other people say the weather. I never corrected her. I had learned a long time ago that correcting Coral cost more than it bought. She was 66, sharp as a fence wire, and she ran every family event like a woman defending ground. This one mattered more than most. Her younger son Dale was getting married, and the reception filled the whole back lawn of Lake Haven Lodge. String lights, a dance floor laid over the grass, 80 folding chairs in white slipcovers. And underneath all of it, a current of talk I kept catching in pieces. A colonel is coming. Dale's people from the base, someone important. The rumor never had a name attached to it. It had been passed mouth to mouth so many times it had turned into pure weather. Dale knew exactly what his brother had married, and so did a few of the people from the base. But in this family, you did not correct Coral's version of a person, and her version of me was a woman who was away a lot, doing something vague the government wouldn't explain. Coral had been polishing that sentence for weeks. She introduced me to a cousin near the bar with a small, practiced shrug. "This is Sam's wife. She's away a lot." The cousin smiled at me the way you smile at a stranger's coat. I held Lila's hand and let it go. Sam, my husband, squeezed my shoulder and whispered that his mom meant well. He always said that. 43 years old and still translating his mother into something kinder than she was. I didn't argue. I had a daughter to keep an eye on and a phone in my pocket that might ring with work no one in that yard would understand. So I smiled, took a glass of lemonade I didn't drink, and watched a family that thought it knew exactly who I was. None of them had any idea who they were actually waiting for. People assume the military is all shouting. It mostly isn't. The best officer I ever served under raised her voice exactly once in 3 years, and it scared us more than any drill. The rest of the time she ran on lists, calm faces, and the refusal to be rushed into a mistake. I built my whole career on that. When a fuel convoy went sideways at 2 in the morning, I didn't slam a desk. I opened a notebook, wrote down what was true, and signed my name to it. That habit followed me home. Sam learned it the hard way, the year his cousin tried to blame him for a wrecked truck. I didn't yell at anyone. I pulled the service records, laid out the dates, and the story fell apart on its own. Sam asked me once why I never just told people off. I told him the line I'd been living by for 20 years. I don't make scenes, I make records. He laughed and said it was the least romantic thing he'd ever heard. Maybe. It had also kept us steady through 3 moves and 2 deployments. That afternoon, my dress blues were hanging in a garment bag in the back of my car, zipped up, out of sight. Dale had asked me to wear them for the last hour of the reception. "Come on, Myra," he'd said on the phone, grinning. "Let the family see what my sister-in-law actually does." I'd told him I'd think about it. The truth was, the idea made me uneasy. I had spent so long being the woman who was away a lot, that stepping into that yard in full uniform felt like turning on a light in a room where everyone had agreed it was dark. Lila was 7, And she had two religions: animals and dancing. That afternoon she wore a yellow dress and brand new white shoes, the kind with the little buckle she had insisted on fastening herself. They squeaked on the wooden floor every time she pivoted, a small rubbery chirp that made her laugh harder each time. There was a song the cousins' kids always demanded, the one with the clap in the middle. We called it the second song because it was always the second thing the DJ played at any family party, and Lila treated it like a personal anthem. When it came on, she dropped my hand and ran for the floor. I watched her find the beat, miss it, find it again. A few of the older kids made a loose ring around her. She spun until her dress flared, then stopped, dizzy and delighted, and looked for me. I gave her a thumbs up. She turned next to find Coral, who was standing at the edge of the floor with a glass of white wine and an expression I couldn't read. "Grandma, watch," Lila called, and did her best spin. Coral didn't clap. Her mouth pressed into a thin line, the way it did when a fork was in the wrong place. I noticed it. I want you to know I noticed it. But a child asking her grandmother to watch her dance is not a crime, and I wasn't going to march across a wedding to police a look. Sam came up beside me with 2 plates of cake and followed my eyes to his mother. "She's fine," he said. He meant Coral. I was watching Lila, those squeaking white shoes, that ridiculous perfect song. I would remember both of them for a long time. Coral found me by the dessert table 10 minutes later. She had a way of arriving beside you like she'd always been there. "Can I be honest, Myra?" she said, which in her language meant something unkind was coming. I said of course. She watched Lila on the floor and lowered her voice. "A girl that age needs her mother home, not flying off wherever the government sends you." I had heard versions of this for 8 years. I kept my face easy. "Lila's doing great," I said. "Look at her." Coral didn't look. "She's wild," she said. "She runs in the house, she interrupts. That's what happens when there's no steady hand." Then she straightened her shoulders and changed gears, because the real subject was never far away. "Today has to be perfect. The colonel is coming, you know. Dale's commanding officer or someone like that. Important people from the base." She said the word colonel like it was a flavor she wanted on her tongue. "So please, keep her calm." I felt the old urge to explain myself, to say something about who exactly might be arriving in uniform that day. I let it pass. Explaining would have felt like begging her to respect me, and I was done begging. "I'll keep her close," I said. That was true, and it was all I owed her. She patted my arm like she'd won something and floated back toward the head table. Sam, who had heard the tale of it, looked at me with that apologetic half-smile. "She's nervous about the wedding," he said. "Just let it go. It's Dale's day." I let it go. I have replayed that decision more times than I can count, even though I still think it was the right one. Letting go is not the same as not watching. Coral did not run the family alone. She had a brother, Brat, who treated every gathering like a meeting he was chairing. He was 63, loud, and convinced the world had gotten soft. When 2 of the little ones chased each other past his chair, he barked, "Kids should be seen and not heard," loud enough to turn heads. He looked pleased when they froze. Brat liked freezing people. Then there was Tara, Sam's cousin, 31, who moved through the reception with her phone up like a torch. She filmed everything, narrated nothing kindly. I caught her aiming the camera at Lila on the dance floor. "Somebody's raising a little animal," she said to the woman next to her, smiling, making sure it carried. The woman laughed. I felt the heat climb my neck and pushed it back down. Reacting was exactly what Tara wanted. She collected reactions the way some people collect coins. I learned later that this was the moment she started building her version of the day, thumbs moving over the screen, dropping clips and captions into the family group chat I wasn't part of. By the time anything actually happened, half the relatives already had a picture in their heads of a chaotic kid and a tense, absent mother. None of them had watched Lila ask her grandmother to look at her. None of them had seen Coral refuse. I want to be fair because fairness is the only weapon I trust. Brat wasn't cruel for sport, and Tara wasn't a monster. Brat measured family by who showed up and bowed his head, and I never bowed. Tara had spent her whole life being the one nobody filmed, so she'd learned to point the camera at other people's bad moments instead. Understanding them didn't make me safer. It just told me what was coming. You learn to read a room the way you read weather. By 6 o'clock, the air at that reception had changed. Too many glances toward the dance floor. Brat holding court near the bar. Coral checking the gate every few minutes for her important guest. I have stood in places where the danger was real, and the body knows the difference between nerves and a warning. This was a warning, so I did what I always do. I made a plan. I crouched down to Lila's level between songs and held both her hands. Hey, stay close to me for a while, okay? She frowned. I'm dancing. I smiled. I know. Dance where I can see you. She agreed the way kids agree, which is to say for a minute, at most. Then I found Sam and told him plainly. I might get a call from work. If I step away, you watch her. Eyes on Lila, not your phone. He nodded, distracted, scanning the crowd for his brother. Sam. He looked at me. I mean it. I've got her, he said. Just let it go, Myra, it's Dale's day. There it was again, his whole personality in one sentence. I didn't push. He was a good father on an ordinary day, and this felt, for one more hour, like an ordinary day. I made sure Lila was within arm's reach. I positioned myself so I could see both her and the gate. I did the things a careful person does. I tell you all this not to make myself sound clever, but because later, when people asked how I let it happen, I needed to know the answer myself. I didn't let it happen. I planned for everything except how fast a grown woman could cross a dance floor when she decided a child was in her way. My phone buzzed at 6:40. The screen showed a number I couldn't ignore. The duty desk. The kind of call you take or regret. I stepped back exactly 3 steps to the edge of the lawn, turned my shoulder to the noise, and answered. Driscoll. It was a status update. Less than a minute. Nothing urgent in the end. But for those few moments, my eyes were on the grass instead of my daughter. Behind me, the second song started. I heard the clap, the kids cheer, the squeak of small shoes finding the beat. Then I heard a different sound. A sharp adult voice cutting through the music, and under it, a child's cry that I knew in my spine before my brain caught up. I turned. Coral was on the dance floor, her hand clamped around Lila's wrist, dragging her off the wood toward the grass while my daughter's feet stumbled to keep up. One white shoe came loose and stayed behind on the floor, lying on its side. Lila's arm was pulled up and back at an angle no arm should make. And Coral, my mother-in-law, was saying it loud enough for 80 people to hear, her face tight and certain and almost proud. No child of a soldier ruins my son's day. Get her out. The yard went quiet in pieces. Brat was already moving, stepping between Sam and the floor, one big hand on Sam's chest, saying something about not making a scene. Tara's phone was up. Hannah, the bride, stood frozen near the cake in her white dress with both hands over her mouth. Lila wasn't crying for show. She was holding her right arm against her body and making a small, high sound, the sound of a kid who has gone past tears into shock. I crossed that floor faster than I have ever crossed anything. I did not yell at Coral. I did not look at her, at all. I dropped to my knees in front of my daughter and the whole reception, the colonel they were waiting for and everyone else, ceased to exist. There is a checklist for this. There is a checklist for almost everything, if you've trained right, and the checklist is what saves you when your hands want to shake. I took Lila's face in my hands first. Look at me, baby. I've got you. Her eyes found mine. Good. Then I looked at the arm without touching it. She was holding it bent, palm against her stomach, unwilling to turn it. Elbow most likely. Not the wrist where the bruise was already coming up in the shape of fingers. I have splinted worse on worse nights, but never on her. Coral was still talking above me, faster now, the certainty cracking. She was spinning into the guests. I had to. Someone had to do something. I didn't answer her. I have read that silence makes people like Coral talk more and dig deeper. And she did. I lifted Lila against my chest, careful of the arm, and stood. The white shoe was still on the floor. I picked it up. Only then did I look at my husband, who was standing a few feet away with his uncle's hand finally off him, his face the color of paper. "We're going to the ER, I told Sam. Now." My voice was low and even, and that evenness seemed to frighten the people nearby more than screaming would have. Brat said something about overreacting, about kids being tougher than they look. I walked past him. I didn't raise my voice. I raised my daughter off the floor and carried her toward the gate. Behind me, I could hear Coral starting to rebuild the story already, telling the nearest guests that Lila had been out of control, that she'd had no choice, that I was being dramatic. Let her talk. I had a hospital to get to and a kid who needed her arm fixed. The walk to the car felt a mile long, though it was maybe 60 yards across the gravel lot. Lila had stopped making the high sound and started shivering, which I liked even less. I buckled her into her booster as gently as I could, supporting the bad arm, the loose shoe in my lap. My dress blues hung in their garment bag in the back, swaying when I shut the door. I didn't think about them then. I thought about the 15 minutes to the county hospital, and whether I should call ahead. Sam came jogging up before I could pull out. He stood at my window, torn down the middle, the way he always was when his mother and his family pulled against the people he'd actually chosen. "Mom's really upset," he said. "She's crying. She says if we leave now in front of everyone." "Sam." I kept my hands on the wheel. "Your daughter's elbow is dislocated, I'm leaving. Can't we just—" "No." He looked back at the lights and the music, then at Lila in the back seat holding her arm, and something in his face buckled. "I'll come," he said. "Stay if you need to keep the peace," I told him. And I wasn't being cruel. I was giving him a door. But I'm going either way. In the end, he stayed for the moment because his mother was sobbing into Brett's shoulder and the bride was in tears and the whole event was tipping over. And Sam has never in his life been able to walk away from a room that's falling apart. I understood it. I drove out of that lot with my 7-year-old in the back, and a wedding behind me coming apart at the seams. And for the first time in 8 years, I did not look back to check whether his family approved. My phone started lighting up before I reached the highway. Not calls. The family group chat. The one Sam was in and I wasn't. Which meant the messages came to me secondhand, forwarded by the one cousin who'd always been decent to me. She sent a screenshot with a single line. "You should see this." Tara had posted her clip. I watched it at a red light with Lila dozing fitfully behind me. It was a short clip, only a few seconds long, and it had been cut with real skill. It started after Coral grabbed her, so all you saw was Lila twisting and crying and pulling against an adult hand, with no sound of what Coral had said, no shot of the wrenched arm. The caption read, "This is what happens when there's no discipline at home." Underneath, the relatives were already piling on. That poor family, on Dale's big day. Some people shouldn't bring kids if they can't control them. Where was the mother? Not one of them asked why a 66-year-old woman had a child by the wrist. Not one of them mentioned the white shoe left on the floor. I sat at that light longer than I should have, the screen lighting my face, and I felt the pull to type, to explain, to send the truth in a paragraph they'd skim and argue with. I knew better. You don't win an argument inside a group chat that's already decided you're the villain. So I turned the phone face down on the passenger seat. "Let them type," I said out loud, to no one. Lila stirred. "Mama?" "I'm here, baby. We're almost there." The light turned green. The phone buzzed against the seat the whole way to the hospital, and I let it. The county ER on a Saturday night is its own kind of theater. We got there a little after 7. I carried Lila through the sliding doors into the cold, bright waiting room, and a triage nurse took one look at how my daughter was holding her arm and moved us up the line. They put us in a curtained bay. A doctor came, young, calm, good with kids. She crouched to Lila's level the way I do. "Hi, sweetheart." Can you show me where it hurts? Lila pointed to her elbow with her good hand, and didn't move the bad one at all. The doctor felt along the arm, gentle, talking the whole time about Lila's yellow dress. Then she looked up at me. I think it's a nursemaid's elbow. The head of the radius slips out of place. It's less common once they're her age, but a hard enough pull on the arm can still slip it. She said the last part without weight, but her eyes asked the question. How did it happen? I told her the truth, plainly, without decoration. A relative grabbed her by the wrist and dragged her off a dance floor. The doctor's pen stopped for a second. She nodded slowly and wrote. Okay, she said. The good news is, this usually fixes fast. The other part we'll talk about. She didn't explain the other part yet. She didn't have to. I had filled out enough forms in my life to feel a particular machinery starting to turn. The quiet machinery of a hospital that has rules about how children get hurt. I held Lila's good hand while the doctor stepped out to get what she needed. Am I in trouble? Lila whispered. No, I said. You're not in any trouble at all. None of this is your fault. She believed me, mostly. She was about to ask me the question I couldn't fully answer yet. The reduction took seconds. The doctor cradled Lila's arm, pressed her thumb to the elbow, and rotated the small forearm in one smooth motion. There was a soft click most parents never hear and never forget. Lila yelped, then blinked, surprised. And a minute later she was reaching for the sticker the nurse offered with the same hand that hadn't moved in an hour. Children heal in ways that should be studied for the rest of us. The doctor sat back on her stool and spoke to me directly. She'll be fine. Keep it easy for a day or two. Then her voice shifted, careful and clear. I want to tell you what happens now. When a child this age comes in with an injury from an adult grabbing her, I'm required to report it. That's not a judgment of you. It's the law. It goes to the county child welfare office first, and because an adult caused the injury on purpose, our protocol also flags it for law enforcement. Sometimes an on-call officer comes by the same night. Sometimes it takes a few days. I nodded. I had expected it from the moment she'd asked how it happened. Something in me, the part that signs its name to true things, felt the ground go solid. This was no longer a story Coral could shape in a group chat. It was a record now, entering a system that didn't care who cried hardest at a wedding. The nurse, an older woman with a badge that read Bonnie, lingered after the doctor stepped out. She handed me a small printed slip, folded once. Your visit and case number, she said quietly, and the name of the officer on call tonight, in case they come by. People always want it later and never have it. I thanked her. I held that slip of paper like it was warm. Then I knelt and slid the white shoe back onto Lila's foot, fastening the little buckle myself, and she watched me do it with enormous tired eyes. Mama, she said. Grandma said I'm not real family. Am I real family now? I held her foot in my two hands and didn't trust my voice for a second. Then the curtain moved, and through the gap I saw a police officer walking toward our bay. The officer was a woman about my age, dark hair in a tight bun, notebook already open. She introduced herself low and easy so as not to scare Lila, then asked if we could step just outside the curtain to talk. Bonnie sat with my daughter and produced a juice box from somewhere, and I stepped into the hall. The hospital called it in, the officer said. I just need your account of what happened. So I gave it to her the same way I'd give a briefing. Time, place, who, what. A relative, 66, grabbed my 7-year-old by the wrist and pulled her off a dance floor with enough force to dislocate her elbow, in front of roughly 80 witnesses, while saying she wanted the child removed. The officer wrote it all down. I'll be honest with you about how this works, she said. In our state, an adult causing injury to a child like this can fall under battery. Whether anything's charged isn't up to me. The county attorney looks at the medical report and the witness statements and decides. I can't promise you an outcome. I'm not asking for one, I said. She glanced up. Most people are. I'm not asking for anyone to be punished, I told her. I'm asking for it to be on the record. That's all. She studied me for a second, the way people do when a reaction doesn't match the script they expected. Then she nodded and wrote that down too. "We'll need statements from people who actually saw it," she said. "Were there witnesses who'd talk?" 80 people had seen it. The question was how many of them would say so out loud against Coral, in a family that measured loyalty by silence. "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "I'll find out tonight." Sam got to the hospital around 8, still in his wedding suit, tie gone, hair wrecked from his hands. He came through the curtain and stopped cold. He saw Lila with her arm in a soft sling the nurse had made, a juice box in her good hand, a sticker on her cheek. He saw the bruise on her wrist, already gone the deep colors. He saw the folded slip of paper in my hand. For the first time all day he was looking at the thing itself instead of his mother's version of it. "Oh, Lila Bug," he breathed, and went to his knees by the bed. She leaned into him. He stayed there a while. When he stood, his eyes were wet and his jaw was tight, and he asked me the question carefully, like he already knew he wouldn't like living with the answer. "Mom's saying you called the police on her. The whole family's saying it? Did you?" "The hospital called it in," I said. "They're required to." I gave a statement. "That's the truth, and you can tell anyone who asks." He pushed his hands through his hair. "This is going to blow up the whole family." "It already blew up," I said. "On the dance floor. I just stopped pretending it didn't." He was quiet. Then, in a smaller voice, "What are you going to do?" I looked at my daughter. Half asleep now. Safe. Fixed. "Nothing dramatic," I said. "I'm going to go back to that reception and tell the truth, in the only language that family has ever respected." Sam frowned, not understanding. "What language is that?" I didn't answer him. "Some things you have to show." I kissed Lila's forehead, told Sam to take her home and stay with her, and I went out to my car, where a garment bag was waiting in the dark. I drove the 10 minutes to our house with the radio off. Sam would bring Lila home and put her to bed. The sitter we'd booked for the late evening was already there, confused by the early end to everyone's night. I went into our bedroom and unzipped the garment bag. My dress blues hung there, pressed, the way I keep them. Dark blue jacket, silver buttons. On the shoulders, the eagles. I want to be clear about why I put it on, because it would be easy to make it sound like vengeance, and it wasn't. I had spent 8 years letting Coral and Brat and the whole lot of them decide I was the woman who was away a lot, the one whose work was a vague embarrassment, the one whose daughter was wild because her mother didn't know how to be home. I had let them, because correcting them felt like asking for a respect I shouldn't have to ask for. I was done letting them, not to win, to stop being invisible in a family I had married into with my whole heart. I buttoned the jacket slowly, each silver button, the way you do a thing you mean. I checked the eagles in the mirror, settled the jacket on my shoulders, and looked at the woman in the glass. She didn't look dramatic. She looked like exactly who she'd been the whole time. I thought about the slip of paper in my pocket and the officer's words about witnesses, and about a reception that was probably still limping along because Coral would never let a party die while there was an audience left. There was still time. The colonel they had been waiting for all day was, in fact, on her way. I picked up my keys. Sam brought Lila home just as I was ready to leave, and the two halves of my evening met in our front hallway. He stopped when he saw the uniform. He had seen photos. He had never seen me wear it standing in our own front hallway, never seen me wear it standing in our own house. And something moved across his face that I'd been waiting 8 years for, a kind of recognition. He didn't say anything clever. He just said, "Oh." Lila was sleepy and small in his arms, her sling tidy against her chest. I took her for a moment and sat on the bottom stair so we were eye to eye. She put her good hand on one of the silver buttons. "You look like a soldier," she said. "I am one," I told her. She thought about that. Then she came back to the thing that had been sitting on her chest all night, because kids do not forget the cruel sentences, they carry them like stones. "Grandma said I'm not real family." I held her hand against the button. Real family, I said, is the people who would never, ever pull you away from somewhere you belong. That's the only test there is. And you, baby, have never once been the person who didn't belong. Not for 1 second. She studied me with that terrible, hopeful seriousness children have. Then where are you going? To make sure everyone there knows it too. I kissed the top of her head, handed her back to Sam, and stood. Her white shoes were lined up by the door where Sam had set them, side by side, both of them now, the buckles done. I looked at them for a second. Then I walked out into the warm June dark and got in the car, and I drove back toward the lights. The reception had not died. Of course it hadn't. When I pulled back into the gravel lot a little before 9, the string lights were still on, and a thinned-out crowd still circled the floor, the way a party keeps moving on momentum after the joy has left it. I sat in the car a minute and watched through the open side of the tent. Coral was working the room. I knew the choreography. She moved from cluster to cluster, touching arms, shaking her head sadly, the picture of a woman wronged. I could practically hear the script. Myra made a scene. Myra called the police on family. Myra ruined Dale's wedding over nothing. Brat stood near the bar nodding along, backing her with his bulk. Tara was showing her clip to anyone who'd hold still, the short clip that proved exactly what they wanted proved. But here is what I also saw, and what gave me the patience to wait 1 more minute. Not everyone was nodding. An older couple near the cake table stood apart, talking low, the man's face grim. A bridesmaid kept glancing at the spot on the floor where the shoe had been. Hannah, the bride, sat at the head table in her wedding dress with mascara tracks down her face, looking less like a woman whose day was ruined by a child, and more like one who'd seen something she couldn't unsee. People had watched a grown woman wrench a little girl's arm. You can spin a thing like that for an hour, but it leaves a residue. The lie was winning the room, but it wasn't winning cleanly. Then I heard it, carrying across the lawn from the gate, the sentence Coral had been waiting for all day, the one that changed the air. The Colonel's here. I have been announced into rooms before. It does something to people, the word Colonel, especially people who have spent all day telling each other an important one was coming. The whole tent turned toward the gate. I watched it happen from the dark edge of the lot before I stepped into the light, so I saw their faces arrange themselves into the expressions they'd been practicing. Brat straightened up and tugged his jacket down. Tara lowered her phone, then thought better of it and raised it again, this time pointed at the gate. And Coral, my mother-in-law, who had built this entire day around the arrival of someone important, smoothed her dress with both hands and fixed a wide, gracious hostess smile on her face, turning toward the entrance to receive her guest. They were all looking for a man. I knew that without being told. Every one of them was scanning for some silver-haired officer with medals, an older stranger who'd shake Dale's hand and lend the family a borrowed shine. That was the Colonel in their heads. That was the Colonel Coral had promised. I stepped out of the dark and walked toward the gate, and the gravel was loud under my shoes, an even, unhurried sound. The first person to see me clearly was a young man in an Air Force dress uniform standing near the entrance, one of Dale's friends from the base. He saw the eagles on my shoulders before he saw my face. His spine snapped straight. His hand came up in a reflex older than thought, and he held a salute, eyes front, waiting. The motion rippled outward. People follow a salute the way they follow a pointing finger. One by one, the faces at that reception turned from the gate to me. I walked into the light of the tent in my dress blues, and the reception went quiet the way a field goes quiet when the wind drops. The young airman held his salute until I returned it, and then he relaxed, and the rest of the room had nowhere left to look but at me. I let them look. I have learned that silence, used on purpose, weighs more than any speech. I stood there and let 80 people read the eagles on my shoulders, the ribbons, the name tape that said Driscoll, and watched the math happen on their faces. The whispers started low and spread. That's the Colonel? That's Sam's wife. The one who? Dale crossed the floor first. My brother-in-law, the groom, still in his wedding clothes. He stopped a few feet away and did the thing his training made him do without deciding to. He came to attention and saluted his own sister-in-law, and his voice cracked when he said it. "Ma'am." He had known what I was for years. He had simply never been allowed to say it out loud at his mother's table. I returned it and put a hand on his arm to tell him it was all right, that I wasn't here for him. Then I looked for Coral. She was standing by the head table, one hand still half raised in the welcoming gesture she'd prepared for a stranger, her hostess' smile frozen and then slowly coming apart. Her eyes moved over the uniform, the eagles, my face, and I watched the two halves of her day fail to fit together. The colonel she had been bragging about all afternoon, the daughter-in-law she had called an absent mother, whose child she had dragged across a floor and called a soldier's brat. Her mouth opened. For once in her life, Coral Brenner had no script. "They said a colonel was coming?" she whispered, and the whole silent tent heard it. "That's you?" "It's me," I said. I didn't say it loud, I didn't need to. The quiet did the work. Somewhere behind me, faint and absurd, the DJ's playlist rolled into the second song, the clap and all. And a few of the children near the floor instinctively swayed before their parents stilled them. Coral recovered the way people like her always do, by reaching for charm. The frozen smile thawed into something warmer and more dangerous, and she came toward me with her hands out, voice pitched for the room. "Myra, sweetheart, there's been a terrible misunderstanding." She turned slightly so the guests could see her being reasonable. "We were also worried about little Lila. How is she? You rushed off so fast, none of us even." "She has a dislocated elbow," I said. "Calm? Flet?" The doctor put it back tonight. A small, ugly sound moved through the crowd. Coral pressed on, faster. "Children get hurt at parties. It's nobody's fault, really. I only moved her because she was spinning into the older guests. I was protecting her. And you've gone and turned it into this whole..." She gestured at my uniform, at the room, at the air. "This whole production." Brat stepped up beside her, broad and loud, playing his part. "Nobody called the police on family," he announced to the room, as if saying it could make it true. "This is being blown way out of proportion. Let's all calm down." I didn't get louder. I have learned that when the other side starts shouting, the most powerful thing you can do is drop your voice until they have to lean in to hear you. So I spoke quietly, and the room went quieter to catch it. "I didn't turn anything into a production, Coral. I put on the uniform I earned so that the people in this family would finally see who I actually am." I looked at her steadily. "You called my daughter a soldier's child like it was an insult. You were waiting all day for a soldier. Here I am." Coral's voice climbed, thin and scraping. "You're embarrassing this family." "No," I said. "I'm ending the part where you got to decide who counts as family." And then I reached into my jacket and took out the slip of paper. I didn't wave the paper around. I just held it. The folded slip with the case number and the officer's name. And I turned to the room instead of to Coral, because the room was where the truth had to live. "My daughter is 7, I said. Tonight a doctor had to put her elbow back in its socket. The hospital is required by law to report an injury like that when an adult causes it. I gave the police my statement an hour ago." I let that settle. The officer told me they'll need accounts from people who actually saw what happened on that floor. I looked around at the faces, the ones who'd been nodding along to Coral's story and the ones who hadn't. I'm not going to argue with anyone about what they think they saw. I'm just going to ask, "Did you see it?" The silence stretched. Coral's eyes darted. Brat opened his mouth. And then the older man by the cake table, the grim-faced one, set down his drink and stood up straight. "I saw it," he said. His voice shook, but he didn't sit back down. "The child did nothing. That woman grabbed her by the arm and yanked her clear off the floor. I've been sick about it for 2 hours. A woman 2 tables over rose next. I saw it too. Then a bridesmaid, quietly. She lost her shoe. I watched it happen. One by one they stood. Not a mob, just people who had been carrying something heavy, and were finally allowed to set it down. And Hannah, the bride, in her ruined makeup and her white dress, stood up at the head table and looked straight at Coral. "I saw you do it," she said, "on my wedding day. I will never forget it." Tara's phone, the one that had filmed the lie, slowly lowered and went dark. As if the night had decided to finish the sentence itself, headlights swung across the lot. The officer from the hospital had said she might come by to start collecting statements while memories were fresh, and here she was, walking up through the gate in no particular hurry, notebook in hand. She took in the scene without surprise: the silent tent, the woman in dress blues, the standing witnesses, the mother-in-law gone gray in the face. "Evening," she said to the room. "I understand some folks here saw what happened to a little girl tonight. I'd like to talk to anyone who's willing." Coral's composure broke all at once, the way a dam doesn't crack so much as fail. "This is insane," she said, too loud, her voice splintering. "This is my son's wedding. You're all taking her side because of a costume." She flung a hand at my uniform. "She walks in here in her little outfit and suddenly I'm the criminal? I have given everything to this family, everything." She was shouting now, turning in a circle, looking for one ally and finding stillness. I stood exactly where I was and did not raise my voice a single degree. When she finally ran out of breath, I spoke into the quiet she'd left behind. "I told you a long time ago, Coral," I said. "I don't make scenes." I looked at the officer, at the witnesses, at the folded slip in my hand. "I make records." There was no triumph in it. There didn't need to be. The record was already made, in a hospital chart and a police notebook, and the standing bodies of a dozen people who would no longer pretend. Coral looked around the tent at her family, at her brother who had gone quiet, at the guests who would not meet her eyes, and you could see her understand, finally, that this was not a thing she could talk her way out of. She turned to the only person she had left. "Sam," she said, "tell her to stop this." I hadn't seen Sam come in. He must have driven over after the sitter arrived, unable to stay away from a room that was falling apart, the way he never could. He stood just inside the tent in his shirt sleeves, and every head turned to him, because Coral had made him the deciding vote and everyone knew it. For 8 years Sam had split the difference. He'd smoothed things over, translated his mother into someone kinder, asked me to let it go for the sake of one more day. I watched him stand there with all of that weight on him, and I did not say a word. This one had to be his. He looked at his mother, who was reaching for him with her whole face. He looked at me in the uniform he'd never seen me wear. Then he looked at the empty spot on the dance floor where his daughter had lost her shoe. When he spoke, his voice was rough, but it didn't waver. "Mom," he said, "you put my daughter in the hospital." Coral started to protest and he talked over her, which I had never once seen him do. "No? I watched you grab her. I let Uncle Brat hold me back instead of stopping you, and I will be ashamed of that for the rest of my life." He swallowed. "I should have stopped you on that floor. I'm stopping you now." Across the tent, Dale stepped up beside his brother, still in his wedding clothes, his jaw set. "Colonel or not, she's my niece," Dale said. "You were wrong, Mom. On my wedding day, you were wrong, and everybody here saw it." Coral stood alone in the middle of the floor between her two sons, and for the first time all night, no one rose to defend her. What happened next surprised me. Coral didn't rage again. She sat down hard in the nearest folding chair, and the fight went out of her shoulders, and when she spoke, her voice was suddenly old. "You don't know what it's like," she said, "to no one and everyone. To be the one who arranges everything and gets thanked for nothing." She stared at her hands. "At my own wedding, my husband's mother told me I'd never be good enough for this family, in front of everyone. I stood there in my dress, and I swore I would never be the one they looked past again." She lifted her eyes to me, and for a moment there was something human in them, something cornered and sad. "I just wanted today to be perfect. I wanted to matter at it. I felt the pull of it. I am not made of stone, and a wound 40 years deep is still a wound." But I have learned that understanding why someone hurt your child is not the same as excusing it, and the two must never be allowed to blur. I crouched down so we were level, the way I do with Lila, and I kept my voice gentle. "I'm sorry that happened to you, Coral," I said. "I mean that. Nobody should be made to feel like they don't belong at their own family's table." Then I let the gentleness hold its shape while the words underneath it stayed hard. "But being hurt 40 years ago does not give you the right to put your hands on a 7-year-old and call her a soldier's brat. It doesn't. There is no version of your pain that turns that into something I forgive tonight." She looked away. She understood, I think, exactly what she had traded, and for what. I stood back up, because crouching too long in front of someone gives them more of you than they've earned. The officer was waiting, patient, and the witnesses were still standing, and the night had a few more practical things in it before anyone could go home. But the family needed to hear the boundary out loud, in front of the same crowd that had watched the harm, because a boundary whispered in private is just a wish. "Here's how this is going to go," I said, and I kept it level and clear, the way you give an order you intend to be followed. "I'm not asking the county for anything. What they do with the report is up to them, not me. I won't beg for a punishment, and I won't beg you out of one." I looked at Coral, and then at Brat, who had not said a word in 20 minutes. "But until there's a real apology to Lila, and until whatever the county decides is finished, you do not see my daughter without me or Sam in the room. Not at holidays, not at birthdays, not for 5 minutes in a hallway." I let that land. You don't get unsupervised time with a child you were willing to drag across a floor in front of 80 people. That's not revenge. That's just the new rule, and it's not up for negotiation. Nobody argued. Brett studied the grass. Tara had drifted to the edge of the tent, suddenly very interested in the exit. Coral sat with her hands in her lap and said nothing, which was, in its way, the first honest thing she'd done all night. I turned to the officer and told her I'd make myself available for whatever she needed. Then I went looking for the bride and groom. I found Dale and Hannah near the cake that no one had finished cutting. The day they'd planned for a year had buckled under someone else's cruelty, and I was sorry for that, truly. I took Hannah's hands. "I'm sorry your wedding turned into this," I said. "You deserved a perfect day, and I hate that you didn't get one." Hannah shook her head, fierce under the wrecked makeup. "Don't you dare apologize," she said. "You protected your little girl. That's the only thing anyone did right tonight." Dale hugged me, careful of the uniform, and whispered that he was proud to be related to me, and I told him to go dance with his wife while there was still a band, because the night didn't have to belong to Coral just because she'd tried to take it. Then I walked back out toward the gate. Behind me, the tent stayed quiet for a moment, and then, hesitantly, the music came up again, and the second song rolled around one more time, the clap and all, and I heard a few brave guests step back onto the floor for Dale and Hannah. I didn't look back at Coral. I was finished looking back at Coral. The gravel was cool now under my shoes, and the June dark smelled like cut grass and somebody's cigarette, and my car was where I'd left it with an empty booster seat in the back, and a single thought running clean through my head. My daughter was home, fixed, asleep, safe. I had not raised my voice once. I had not needed to. I got in the car, set the folded slip of paper carefully in the console, and drove toward the only people whose opinion of me had ever actually mattered. The county did follow up. A caseworker called that week, kind and thorough, and after she'd reviewed the medical report and a stack of witness statements longer than I expected, the county made its own decision in Coral's case. With no prior history on her side, it did not become a trial, and there were no handcuffs. Instead, the prosecutor agreed to resolve a formal charge through a diversion program and counseling, leaving a record that would follow Coral for a good while. I had told the truth and let the system weigh it, and that was all I'd ever wanted. The family group chat went through a strange reversal. Once the witnesses started talking, once people who'd actually stood in that tent began correcting the story, the tide turned. Tara quietly deleted her clip, though half the family had already seen the dishonest little clip for what it was. Brat stopped holding court for a while. A few relatives who had piled on me in writing sent the kind of awkward, sideways apologies people send when they can't quite say the word sorry. I accepted them and moved on, because carrying grudges is heavy, and I had a daughter to lift instead. Sam changed too, in the way that matters. He stopped translating his mother for me. When she called to test the boundary, he held it. Every time. Without my asking. It turned out the man I married had a spine all along. He'd just spent 40 years being told to keep it folded up for the sake of peace. Coral has not seen Lila alone since. She sent one card, eventually, with a real apology in it, and I read it to my daughter and let Lila decide what she wanted to do with it. Lila's elbow healed in 2 days, the way the doctor promised. Children mend faster than the rest of us. The harder things took longer. A few weeks later, on an ordinary Sunday, I was making coffee when the second song came on the kitchen radio, the clap and all. Lila looked up from her cereal, considered her healed arm for a second, and then climbed down and started to dance in her white shoes right there on the linoleum, buckles done, both of them on. She spun until her hair flew, the way she had on that floor, and this time, nobody crossed a room to stop her. She caught me watching and held out her good hand, and I set down the coffee and danced with my daughter in our kitchen. When the song ended, she leaned against me, out of breath, and asked the question one last time, smaller now, almost sure of the answer. "Mama, am I real family?" I knelt down and looked her in the eyes. Respect isn't something you demand by being the loudest in the room. It's something you earn by being the one who protects the smallest person in it. That's my story. One dance, one uniform, one little girl who just needed to know she belonged. If someone ever made you feel like you had to earn a seat at your own family's table, let this be your reminder tonight. You don't. You never did. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.